Hello,
Hi.
and welcome to another edition of Story World Explorers, where we're exploring the story world of the perfect transmedia studio. Isn't that what we're
Oh,
doing?
very
that
nice.
was what we were doing
I
today.
like
That's
it.
what we're doing.
So we had Chris Masson on the program today, who was the story world architect for the Unknown 9 story world, which you may have heard of, ended in a bit of a whimper when the video game came out and didn't meet expectations. So we got to talk about his experience with Unknown 9 and now how he's applying that to a new model for studios in the future to mitigate risk and actually use transmedia well.
Yeah, fostering a whole different way of collaboration and testing data, understanding your audience, and just developing a more cohesive story world approach that kind of, like you said, mitigates the risk. But there's inevitable risk in developing a new IP.
Right. So it's a great conversation. There's a lot to learn, even if you're not a studio and you are an individual artist thinking about starting your transmedia franchise. All these lessons all work together. So stick around and
away we go.
All right, welcome back to another edition of Story World Explorers. Today is a different type of Story World Explorers, one of the expert varieties outside of actual people with story worlds are working on. Though, Chris, I'm sure you're working on plenty of story worlds as well.
Yeah, in my brain full of story, yes. I think in worlds now. That's what I do.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that's how we have to start approaching these things. So this is Chris Masson. Chris Masson, we met you on LinkedIn. You messaged us. And yeah, I'll let you introduce yourself because it's absolutely fascinating having to go your experience as a quote-unquote lore master for a transmedia franchise, the Unknown 9 story world, and what happened there and everything. So, yeah, go ahead, take it away. Introduce yourself.
Yes, Chris Masson. Basically, I'm a writer and a producer, a storyteller. I've been in media and arts and entertainments for over 20 years and played many roles and worked in nearly every entertainment medium out there. I trained as an actor, then studied literature and creative writing, scraped by as an artist and performer and educator. I started working in television. I switched to producing and developing projects for digital media, and then spent the last 5 years in narrative and transmedia design as a story architect at Reflector Entertainment, working on the Unknown 9, as you alluded to. And I think that it's the last 5 years that, and maybe a bit more, since I was developing some projects that ended up being transmedia, that is most relevant to what we're talking about here, to Story World Explorers. And so, I was working on Unknown 9, and for those who don't know, it was an ambitious transmedia project that wanted to drop not just a game or a podcast, but an entire story world in many media, more or less all at once. We released something like 9 major products, like web series, 3 podcast seasons, novels, and the one that was supposed to fund it all, the video game, it didn't sell well, and the project got shut down. And that's the way these things go sometimes. And right now I'm trying to meet as many people as I can in media and in transmedia, in the games industry, because for the work I want to be doing, I need to be building teams, I need to be leading teams, and there's an opportunity here to implement some of the very expensive lessons that I learned about developing IP. Because when it comes to transmedia, I think a lot of people will and already have looked at Unknown 9 and said, see, transmedia just doesn't work for video games.
Well, I right after our initial podcast meeting, I looked up online about it, and you have all these YouTube creators. They all they're laughing at it. They're like, here's this thing that everybody thought was going to be the next Marvel, and it totally flopped. And it's like, okay, let's back up and get to the point of how it flopped and what the approach was that was wrong with it.
Right.
It's not a fundamental philosophy issue. It's it's not the concept of transmedia that doesn't work. It's how it was implemented, and I think that's part of the interesting parts of what we discovered about how it went from top down, and there was a break in communication of what this actually was. Which I think is really
that's another reason to have you on the podcast, to dispel some of those things, right? If anybody that's coming and attacking it's like we're a religion, we're a cult, a transmedia cult here of like, no, it didn't work because of this reason, right? But because transmedia is so big and so complicated, right? And these are really expensive mistakes, and it comes down to execution, to the smallest minute details sometimes of whether or not something is going to be successful or not. And yeah, for our audience, you may not even have heard of Unknown Nine. I mean, I only heard about it because it was popping up on my feeds of like, hey, there's this video coming out that's transmedia storytelling, and so naturally I pinged that, and I was like, oh, I'm really interested, and then it just vanished off the face of the earth. I mean, it dropped off until you messaged us a few weeks ago, and obviously when I saw what you had worked on, I was like, well, we have to talk about this because this is crazy. So something that you're working on right now, right, is really reflecting on your time at Unknown Nine, because there's a lot of stuff that happened, and there's a lot of reasons why things didn't work out. But what you've been doing is that you've been spending time in breaking down your thoughts, your experiences, and what ultimately led to, after a few weeks of this video game being out and being panned by anybody under the sun, that the studio
was not as bad as that, man. But yeah,
it was panned. It started fires. No, but it was not received well enough for the studio to
it just didn't get the
investing
numbers.
anything else.
The sales numbers,
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah. So tell us what let's kind of break down what happened at Unknown Nine in broad strokes. We don't want to get anybody in trouble here. So because as you said, like, it wasn't just the video game, right? There was a vault of stuff that was being worked on, that was published. It wasn't as though there wasn't fans of the Unknown Nine world, but something major happened in the middle of it, right? And I'll teeing you up to talk about that. That really pivoted, like, how things were being used, how things were being published, what the thought process was behind it. So yeah, give us a little history lesson here. What happened?
Well, the history. So it was the IP was created by Alexandre Amancio, who was a veteran of some of the early Assassin's Creed games, and was especially a supporter of the transmedia that they were doing on Assassin's Creed, especially comic book tie-ins, and he created this great world which drew on a lot of different things. It drew on this Indian legend of Ashoka and the 9 unknown men. It drew on the idea of secret societies. It drew on sort of the gray areas of history and the cutting edge of science, where science and mysticism blur. It drew on, it created this this ancient lost civilization, and we had a whole conlang there. That was the first time I'd worked with a conlang, and that was its own thing. I could talk about that, working on a fictional language for an hour, because man, that took up so much time.
Yeah, right. I can imagine so.
And I think part of the production paradigm behind it was that the Bible was owned internally. And that's where I came in. I was the story architect, and I was really owning that Bible, helping to develop it, patch up holes, make sure that it was complied with, if you will, across all the products. And with all the products, except for the video game, which was done in-house, would be done sort of with these external teams that were working in close collaboration with the internal core. Right. So we had a narrative director and a producer, and that was like, the three of us were really the core. And so we had, comic book creators that were top of their game. You know, like they'd worked for Marvel and Image Books. We had a novelist who, um, is a guy that is not a household name, but has written so many books and has sold so much genre fiction, um, that he was just an excellent fit. And it was really about assembling a team um, that collaborated well and was knew the assignment. They knew that
Yeah.
this isn't you don't have carte blanche to do everything.
Mhm.
So
Right,
much
right,
of
right.
the conversation is about carving out just what space you have. You know,
Right.
and so much of my job was about reading the drafts and saying, oh hey, it could be even more tied to the rest of the universe if instead of this name,
Sure.
use this name.
Sure.
Um, for instance. So I mean that gives you a little bit of a window into how we were producing things, and honestly, like I'm really proud of everything that we put out in the transmedia. Um, Now, I think where it started to get difficult is there's really no playbook for how to use all this stuff to support a AAA or double A video game.
Sure.
Um,
Mhm.
and I think the thing you're alluding to, which changed things, was that in the middle of it, our the company was bought by Bandai
Yeah.
Namco Entertainment, which is one of the biggest entertainment conglomerates in the world, and I think they're the second biggest in Japan, in fact. Um, and and after a while, um, Alexandre, who founded the company and created the IP, also left and went off to do his own thing. Um,
Right.
so it was a challenge to uh, there's no playbook, you know. Um, and it wasn't as though there was a dedicated transmedia designer at the top. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
so I think marketing looked at all these different assets, the novels, the web series, etc., and we're just so excited by it. Um, but I guess we didn't really crack the formula as to like how to order those or promote the releases in order
Mhm.
to build excitement in the game. It also might have been a content problem. Maybe there wasn't enough of an obvious connection between the game and the rest of the products. Um,
Sure.
so yeah, those are some of the, I think, creative challenges that
Hmm.
we encountered. But for me, um, the the reality isn't that transmedia doesn't work for video games. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think
Sure.
that there's a huge opportunity here to use some transmedia practices and ethos to perform R&D for new IP.
Mhm.
Because like being an outsider working in video games, because this is the first time that I worked in video games, um,
Mhm.
even though I've been a lifelong gamer, uh, having that point of view, I think, enabled me to identify a few things that other industries, entertainment industries, and practices, including transmedia, do really well, and that the games industry would do well to incorporate. Um, like in transmedia, there's a focus on the user journey
Mhm.
that isn't always present in video games or video game marketing. Um, Focus on audience engagement and feedback, an openness to and an awareness of a wide variety of platforms, and a sensitivity to the affordances and limitations of each one. Um, Audience profiling. These are all like tools that transmedia designers know well, and if you can leverage that to do R&D, then I think there's a real opportunity, and that's what I've been thinking about, and what I'm most excited about to talk about,
Sure.
like at this point.
Right.
You want me to get into that, or do you have more questions? I just like
Yeah.
spewed a
Yeah,
lot.
I
No.
think well, you talked a lot, and I had a couple like so. One of the things was is just like trying to for me, it's like trying to link back to like you said that the founder of the company who started the IP he left, and then there was no head of what to do. There was no way to almost say definitively this is right, this is wrong. And I think, it's like kind of like to relate this back to another big transmedia franchise that is sort of quasi transmedia at this point. But when Disney bought Lucasfilms, they kind of cut out the creator and then they just started doing whatever they wanted. And now you have a hodgepodge of things. You're like, wait, how is this connected to this? Do I care about this? What are we doing? Why did they make 3 other movies other than just to make a lot of money? And do you think that particular part, like the transmedia team, almost has to have a connection to the person who started it? That original creator is a good anchor, or at least someone that can help you like find a tether and be like, yes, this is what I was trying to do with this, or you know what I mean?
Or at the very least, not to be like almost beholden to the almighty dollar, right? So
Yeah,
like
right.
signing, like you said, when the company was sold, right, it became a very top down, like, hey, this is what's what, right? Like we're focusing on this video game, and that's what needs to happen. Whether the audience, right, and we can talk about this, was ready for it or not, right? And you were talking the web series, and you had books, and this and that. It takes a long time for gestation to, like, oh, okay, right. It's not enough to publish this content, this multiple transmedia streams, right? I mean, you could post a million things, right? And if there's no interaction and there's no, as you said, like an audience journey of like, hey, like once again, you don't have to interact with everything. That's the point of transmedia too. I shouldn't have to read the books to understand what's going on in the video game. But what you're trying to do is prove the concept. Like, hey, this IP is interesting enough to this person. 20% of them never even heard of video games. They would never play video games.
Right.
But there is, and within that 80%, a good chunk of them that's going to go and would go to the video game if the path is made.
And like what you were talking to, it's like sometimes it's, with the low cost content, it's good to test. Test what is working, test what's not working. Then you have a good idea of like, oh, this is getting a lot of traction. People might be more interested in this being the focus of the video game than what we had originally thought. And I think it's much easier to pivot with smaller concepts and smaller things than it is with a big thing once you've invested all this money into it. And, going back to like, how it works, how transmedia works well, I mean, you just look back at there was 2 different there's a lot of video games now that are becoming series, but one video game series that didn't do well and just decided to ignore everything that the games did was the Halo series, and they canceled it. And the part was like, I was reading it, and I was like, because I was watching the Halo series, I never played the video games because I didn't have an Xbox growing up, but I was watching this series, and because I watched my friends play it, and I was piecing together a couple of things. I'm like, this isn't, wow, I must, and I'm thinking throughout the entire time I'm watching this, I have to buy these games. I have to play. I have to understand what was going on in the world, just to find out that they were like, no, this is a parallel universe where nothing in the games have ever impacted.
Right.
And then you're like, oh, well, that's stupid. And then the Fallout series comes out, and it's a completely different story about a completely different vault, one that the games, I don't know if they've touched on it, but it's a number system, so obviously at one point there might have been a reference to it, but so now I'm in this Fallout series, and I'm like, oh wow, maybe I can play these games and get a better understanding of the world that it is. So I think that, it's like you have to kind of, test and, understand what your audience is really ready for.
Well, they're right. They're looking to engage with it more.
I think you're exactly right. And to get back to the start of the question, I don't feel I never felt like we were without leadership or direction.
Okay.
And it was never that there was a really good handoff in our case of like Alexandre owned the vision of it, and when he moved on, like that vision was crystallized in the Bible, and I owned the Bible. So like I was the owner of the vision. But luckily at that point, like our projects were already like all being developed. They're all greenlit. If we got to a second story cycle, then there's always going to be like, you know, cost benefit analysis and arguments between the business and the content and the creative, and those things you navigate. But we didn't get there. Now, in terms of like testing with a smaller audience, absolutely. And you know, I have like an entire model sketched out of like how this could work, and it all starts because like developing a new IP is like the hardest thing. You know, even the guys that made The Last of Us, you know, if you watch the documentary about that creation process, they're like, don't make a new IP, just don't do it. It's so hard. But you need to, you know.
Yeah.
It's a catch-22 that studios find themselves in. At some point, they need to create a new IP. But you know, the odds are stacked. Audiences are risk averse. The market's saturated. Discovery is hard or broken. People are always saying there's too many games now, and there's obviously lots of sequels getting made, but there will always need to be some new IP. And typically, you know, for a studio, that would mean greenlighting a game project if it's a AA game between like 20 million and 60 million. If it's AAA, like 100 million or more, without any real indication that it's going to connect with an audience. You know, there might be some focus groups, some internal feeling, and that is, you know, the problem that I think we're solving here. Yeah, and so this this model is about leveraging what works about transmedia without over investing in order to create new and scalable IP, right? It's IP that's built with, you know, big dreams in mind. And I've conceived this for you know, a studio that's looking to develop original IP with lower risk and stronger audience alignment. It's not about announcing a big transmedia plan up front.
Sure.
Even though we love transmedia, it can sound like a pitch, you know, rather than just you know, a great game or a great song. But it is using transmedia elements to quietly like build build the world, and really using different story formats as an R&D process. So, you know, to get into that just a little more, it's like, so instead of greenlighting a full game right away, I'll give you like an overview, and we can talk about like individual phases if you want. But to give you an overview, it's like the studio will first develop a small portfolio of IP concepts, and each one that they want to do this with can get tested through smaller transmedia expressions, like, you know, a short comic series, a podcast series, narrative Instagram accounts, interactive prototypes, webtoons. There's a lot of different ways to do this, and these are just teasers. They're functional, emotional entry points into the world, like something that on their own a fan could fall in love with. And then the idea is to track what resonates, to have a plan from the start about where it can go, track what resonates, see what communities form, which ideas spark fan art, cosplay, curiosity, and then it's your signal testing layer. From there, then they can make a strategic greenlight decision based not just on gut or internal hype or a couple of focus groups, but on actual audience response.
Yeah, I think that and what you're indicating there too, and this is something that is lost even within transmedia producers and people that are doing transmedia storytelling, is we get really excited about one particular piece, right? We're really excited about the book. We're like, oh god, this book's fucking amazing. It's gonna be great. And we get really excited about the video game. It's like, I just need it. And we had this discussion, right? We've talked, and I know that you know people, and we definitely know people that have gotten sucked into this concept, the idea. All I need is somebody to see this big thing. And big things will happen. And it's the field of dream fallacy. You build it, they will not come. That's not how this works, right? There are no ghosts in the outfield. So when you get really excited, and what you're saying is finding the traction points, even with the idea of having multiple IPs. And this is a concept that a very, very early version of this podcast was told to us by our producers, like, always have something else. What else you got? You will get that question. What else you got? If somebody's interested in investing in it, like, oh, I really like this, but I don't like westerns. What else you got? So the idea of having these IPs that you're working, and it's putting out fishing lines. I have another metaphor. I'm a metaphor machine. Like on a loan, when they put out the station fishing line, trying to catch we're gonna catch as many pikes as I can.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know where they are. I just know that they're out here somewhere. And so it's really a discovery process. Transmedia is a discovery process. It is not a railroad tracks. You throw out buoys, you throw out lines, whatever you want to throw out fishing wise, right? You can throw out a net, but you're trying to find where the fish are. Where is your audience? And what's resonating right there. Before, once again, like even investing, you said hundreds of millions of dollars into AAA games. Man, it's like maybe we should invest another $3,000 in the next story of this webtoon, right?
Well,
that's the indication that you're looking for.
Imagine if you did, give that $60,000 to $100,000, $100,000. That's nothing. $100 million. Think about how many different smaller projects you could greenlight. They don't even all have to be within the same world, and yet you're putting it all into one thing, one project that you, as you said, you have a wing and a prayer. You have a few focus groups that say, we'd be interested in something like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think this idea of testing and being open to, like, this is where it's like, it's like you don't want to, a lot of creators don't want that, that mesh to blend where it's like, if they don't want this character to die, but he has to die, I want to be able to kill him. You know what I mean? And it's like, we're not saying you can't kill him. Never saying that, but it's a point of, is this character even resonating with anybody? Is this the best way?
Would anybody care if he died?
Would anybody care if he died? It's like, or do they like him, but do they like the parts that are, it's like, what part of the story are they resonating with him? So it's about experimenting. It's about seeing what is working, what is not working. Not saying that the audience gets to tell you what to do, but they should push you in the way that the IP should organically grow, and ultimately that gets you to your bigger goal.
Yeah, these are all elements that would ultimately make for cheap failures, right? or surprising successes.
Right.
And in my experience working within studios and other corporate structures, investing like $1 to $3 million, which would be like a robust investment in this sort of model from what I'm talking about, is not a crazy expense if the studio is big enough. And it's a lot cheaper than going $30 million all in, and failing.
Right.
And within a corporate structure, a studio structure, often they have the benefit of having teams that are looking for business opportunities, and they will often have like strategic targets, right? And to me, that is the start of the first phase of this model. Is you start with identifying an opportunity, right? And that could mean recognizing an underserved niche, filling a gap in a publisher's portfolio, expanding to a new target audience, exploring a particular theme that for whatever reason we feel is going to be on trend in the next few years, and ideally this also deliberately aligns with something that your prospective funders are thinking, right? Like if you and this is the example I'll roll with, like maybe if your publisher knows that they want to release a cozy life sim that runs on all platforms, including mobile, and that they have an audience profile that they call Gen Z dreamers, let's just say. Then from there, we would brainstorm and refine a small group, maybe 3 original IP concepts that could meet that opportunity, and have these developed just enough to test their creative potential and strategic fit. To be able to talk about this without having, obviously like a story or a comic book to present at the pitch. And we've talked about this before, how having like, oh, here's the pilot that I shot. You did what? You shot?
Yeah,
I don't need
right,
this
right.
pilot. Like, this isn't for me.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
out.
Right.
You develop it just enough. And a little side note, the how of the development process is its own episode, right? It's its own.
Sure.
We could riff on that as for a long time, but for us, for today, I'm just gonna skim over those details.
Right.
So, I would develop a small slate of those, and then pitch those concepts to the relevant stakeholders and gatekeepers. And in those pitch decks, we'd want to put the things that you would normally expect to see in a story world pitch, like setting, tone, character, a lot of mood board visuals. But what's a little bit different is that specifically, I'd also want to have what the first and second entry points are going to be, right? So like the first story product and the second story product. And what would the video game look like, right? You don't have to go super far on those, but like for the story products, I want to know what mediums are employed and a synopsis of the experience. This is first one is a webtoon. This is what's special about it. And then we would do an audio podcast for this reason. This is what's special about it. And for the game, I'd want to know like the genre and just like a few hooks, especially like around mechanics. What's going to make it interesting? We're not really leading with story at this point, because I think I've been in too many pitches where I'm like trying to sell people on the details of the story. Like, oh man, but the twist in the third act is so great, and that's just like it's not. A pitch meeting is not the medium for that,
Sure. Right.
So, yeah, and so right from the outset, we're thinking, how does the audience come into this world? What is the journey when they get there? Which for transmedia is like that's like such a transmedia way of thinking. But in games, it's not always. It's not from the beginning, right? That's not taken into account from the beginning. User journey is only talked about once marketing gets involved, right? It's like, okay, what's the teaser going to be? When do we release it? But this is starting with that in mind. So,
and it's also what you end up doing, and I do want to tie this back into for the people that are the individual artists out there that listen to this podcast, the ones that are trying to incorporate transmedia into what they're working on. But this is very specifically a studio, right? Like, if you're an individual artist that's going and pitching to stakeholders, and like hopefully they called you because they thought that one concept that you're working on is kind of interesting, right? So you don't have to go out of your way and do that. But the, when we lost train of thought. Looked at Jack's eyes, lost train of thought.
Happens all the time.
Happens all the time.
So, but what I was saying is because what you're building there is you're not, because you said it's weird because you're like when you're thinking about a story world and you're saying let's not start with the story first. Let's start with what we're trying to with and I think what you're doing because you're incorporating the ability to let me back up a little bit because I think a lot of times it's really easy to get attached to a creative concept as an artist, and when we're trying to say you gotta test, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what they're gonna want. It's easier to build these boundaries, these buckets, these concepts, and then because as a transmedia story world, you're gonna have to use more than one creator to create all this stuff. Someone can't come up with the 1,000 pieces of content that are going to need to be made to lead into the video game concept, let's say. So you're gonna constantly have to use different voices, different creators, different people with different expertise in how to tell that story. And I think by putting them into those little buckets, like you said, it's like you said with the one when you said with the Unknown Nine about how working with those other people was so cool because they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing, and they had a really clear idea of what that story was they were supposed to tell.
Right.
It wasn't like It wasn't like and Netflix I think has done this with a couple of those with the Duffer Brothers or whatever. They signed them to that $1 billion deal or whatever, and they say 5 years, give us 2 concepts, and it's like whoa, okay, what am I going to come up with? Those 2 concepts, they could be anything. They already paid us. What are we going to, it's just like endless possibilities. But now you have this creator who, is a skilled laborer, skilled in that they can come up with things. If you give them enough things to work with, they could come up with something very quickly, and they can almost kind of discover it very, they can discover it. It doesn't have to be like super well like outlined. They can go because they know what their boundaries are, so they're going down this path, like Frank's saying, buoys, not railroad tracks. They have their border, and so they can come up with something super interesting, super fun, and they're free when they do it because it's not their idea anyway. It's not their world. They're just playing in a sandbox, you know. So I think that what you're
we had a really good conversation about sandboxes at one point on this podcast, and about how that really does do a great job fostering creativity.
Right. Oh man, yeah,
and
because it becomes
once you have restrictions, then where
because it becomes play at that point, and I think that's something that I think and it's like you just get your ego out of the way, and you just start playing, and you start coming up, and you're like, oh, this would be really cool, and you're just feeding off of the thing that and that's a cool thing when you basically say you have the story as the artist, but this is your boundary. You can't go outside of this concept, and then you get a really cool, enthusiastic, curious story, and it's not, you're not tethered to it. As a creator, you're just not tethered to it.
So let's I found my own buoys again, I think, before I wander off again.
Don't look at my eye.
No, I don't want. I try not to. They're the crystal blue. So, I want to attach this back to, because we're talking about studio systems, right? We're talking about Chris, Frank, and Jack are working under, within IO Interactive, and they want to make a video game about X, and we go like, all right, well, I've never heard of a video, like, what's that genre? We have to make almost find the audience profile and then come up with concepts for content that is going to attract those people that we know eventually would play this video game, right? Like there's a lot of work that goes into just framing it out and then pitching it in a business way to make sense to business-minded people, right? For the individual artist, I would very much caution you from trying to think about what trends you're trying to attach yourselves to, right? Trends chasing it's no good. It works for businesses that can have 5 IPs running at the same time. They only need 1 IP to hit. You are an individual artist, right? You barely have enough time for the IP that you want to get done, right? Yeah. So when you're thinking about, all right, entry points, everybody, no matter what the story world is, whatever concept, if you're trying to transmediate something, you have the catalyst where you're like, oh my God, this needs to happen. I need this feature film. I need this video game. This is where it all comes down to. And what you do is you take steps back of the world and say, okay, so how can I introduce this world so that I can prove, if I were to get into this room at IO Interactive, who is interested in producing this, or is interested in the world, how can I prove that people will pay for the video game, right? It's risk, they're risk averse. They're trying to find the best ways to not lose money. That is all this comes down to. And so just and the testing concept and the discovery of your audience is still the exact same though, right? You're producing content that I would say you should look for stuff that you can do individually, right? Or that you have friends and creatives around you that can work on an IP together. That's low fidelity, right? Not crazy, you don't need 20 years to produce it, and low cost, and something that has high upside to attract those audience members to then, once again, it's proving the concept, right? So, Chris, when you're talking about this studio concept, the system of like, I got 5 IPs, we're going to move forward with 3 concepts, right? Each of these concepts get $3 million each, and then whichever one starts to get a little hotter, we're gonna put a little bit more thought into, and we're gonna start developing. And hey, that boo of that video game, it's getting a little closer, right? It's important to know too. We don't know when that will happen. That's another problem within business, is that it's like, well,
Timelines.
so 2027. It's like, well, I don't know if we're going to be ready by 2027. It's not that we couldn't produce it in 2027. Is the audience ready for it in 2027?
Right.
Or are we going to end up with low sales and reflect back and be like, oh, we pulled the trigger on this way too soon? And so just going back into this, just to continue on what we're talking about and everything, the next step, right, of what your concept is finding those, and you experience this at Unknown 9, of finding these third parties to produce these things while the IP is owned within. Once again, if you have friends, you're working on your own IP, have it owned by you guys, who is the creative direction, but then also working with fantastic artists in multiple disciplines, just like with the novelists that you were saying, that it just knows exactly what they're doing, and making those sandboxes for them to work in to then create that content.
In Transmedia too, there's this point where there's audience sandboxes as well, where you kind of want the audience to be able to interact with the story without, with Chris Jones on his, they built Nick Jones, I'm sorry. Who is Chris Jones? I don't know who Mike Jones is.
Yeah, right, Mike Jones. I was about to say, I'm like, I know who Mike Jones is.
Nick Jones. They build 2 sandboxes, but this is also true where, as the concept or as the Transmedia team, you're also building sandboxes for your artists to play in as well.
Right.
And I think I'm just
the third party, yeah.
Right, the third party. I'm just linking these 2 things together because I think a big part of Transmedia is knowing those boundaries and building those sandboxes so that people can feed it.
Correct.
Right. The bigger the castle is.
I think one of the big opportunities when you're working within a studio, I think, and this is one of the things that that I wanted to do more of with Unknown 9, and we were getting there, but it was a bit of a struggle. Was to leverage internal resources. Like if you're a video game, you have concept artists on staff.
Sure,
you
right,
have you have narrative designers on staff. You have 3D modelers. There's no telling just how you can cross-pollinate internally and use internal resources. At the very least, they can kind of be test audiences. You can be all along the process, exposing them to what these new concepts are and seeing what lands for them. Like if you have 3 concepts that you're developing and everyone in the studio just loves one of them, well, even if the external audience is mid on it, might be worth considering going for it anyway. Because if you have a whole team of passionate devs on a game, it might actually turn out better than one where they're just kind of like, okay, whatever, even if the audience is already there.
Right.
So it's something to consider. So, so at this point in the process, it's kind of like once you've decided on a concept to go forward with, and ideally, again, it's one that responds to a perceived opportunity. If we're imagining, like I said, that the publisher wants a cozy life sim for Gen X dreamers, maybe we're coming up with a world that's like a solar punk world where anthropomorphic animals work beside humans to farm magical fruit for survival and for fun, and our stories follow characters that are new to it and are going through the academy to learn to be these magical farmers. It's like Animal Crossing meets Harvest Moon meets Hogwarts.
Right.
And we're rolling with that. Yeah. So at this point, we're going to think, okay, so what is the first execution of that? Like you said, it's going to be something with a low barrier to entry. We're not planning our Netflix series for your first step. You will never go anywhere.
You'll lose a lot of money and be very frustrated.
Yep.
Yeah, that's it. It's key that it stands on its own, is compelling, is a self-contained experience, because it's not being advertised as the beginning of a transmedia empire. It's introducing tone, voice, the world of the IP. It tests the waters with an audience. It signals internally, like I said, whether the story is creatively fertile and has community potential. And if it doesn't work with the studio or with the audience, it's the cost of the mistake is very low, right?
Right.
So if the audience is asking for more and is curious, is engaging with it, then after a certain amount of time, probably a matter of months, if there's a lot of content going out regularly, then there's another stage gate, which means like everyone's going to come back together, all the stakeholders, and say, okay, is this worth investing another the next chunk of money to bring it to the next story product? And if the answer is yes, then you're going into your second story product. And
Right.
I think this is the time for it to move to another medium, right? So if it's
Sure.
worked well in a webtoon, put it in an audio drama.
Sure.
It's about extending the world, deepening the lore, shifting the perspective, maybe. And I think that by opening up these complementary channels, like if it was just visual and now it's audio, there's like a transmedia magic in there.
Sure.
And I feel like that moment is one that I don't see designers giving enough attention to. Just
Sure.
like how exciting that can be for an audience.
Sure. Yeah.
It's really built up in my head because I love those moments. And it does earn, like when well, that's I'm getting off track here, but
Well, it's interesting because, like you said, if most of the time when we talk to transmedia storytellers and they want to go to a different medium, they're looking for the new audience that would use that medium. But another aspect of it is, hey, can we get these guys to go to a different medium, right?
yeah.
There's a fantastic user stories of Hogwarts Legacy coming out, and
Mhm.
people buying game systems that have never played video games before to play that game, right? There are plenty of video game players to play that game, right? But there were people that were like, you know what? I don't even know what a PS5. All right, fine, that's what I'm gonna get. I don't know how to, but I have to. I have to.
Yeah, that's
You
a
know
big
what I mean?
that's a big signal to you. If you can
Right.
get people to like subscribe to a new YouTube channel where you're putting out the content, that's big. They weren't there before, and now they're there. It's even better if they move from YouTube to something that is a bit more obscure.
Well,
You could mapping that journey too, right? Of like, and then
Yes.
you're like, then you start to sketch out like, this is the audience member we're looking for, right? Because
Right.
if they made that jump,
Yeah.
we're really
Yep.
resonating with them
But-
for whatever reason.
But I'm also thinking, because we were talking about how difficult, just how long some of these IPs have even existed before they've gotten their AAA video game. I mean, look at how long has Harry Potter been a thing before it got a
before that, they made god awful.
No, they weren't video. They were movie
Films
They
to
were
video game was
They
awful.
weren't real video games.
Yeah,
I mean, they weren't a AAA video game. Even going back to what's it?
Fallout, Last of Us.
No, not. Well, those started as video games.
Yeah.
James Bond too. James Bond
James
had a
Bonds
bunch
were
of
awful.
crappy video games that were basically just movie tie-ins that you would find in a Cracker Jacks box. I mean, they didn't put any thought into it, and now
And GoldenEye,
is
to
it
be
IO?
fair.
IO Interactive.
just came up with this completely new, separate
Origin
story.
for
James
Bond.
I mean, even think about, Star Wars didn't have a really good video game for, like an original idea for a video game
Well,
that
Battlefront
wasn't.
and-
No, yeah, it was all
wasn't tied-
adaptations.
Yeah, but that came out in 77. 1977 was when Star Wars came out, and when did Battlefield come out? So it takes a long time, and I think what you're talking about too with video games is that it's really hard, I think, to test with a video game because you have so many different assets. Like, for a video game to work, the world should feel lived in and basic, kind of developed to a certain extent. You know what I mean? Like,
so if you start on smaller things,
so you could kind of learn you're discovering your world through these smaller test things, so that when you get this video game, systems are working. You know what's working. You know what the audience wants to do in these games. Like, if you're developing a game where people can turn into werewolves, and the video game, at no point can you turn into a werewolf, you're doing something wrong,
Exactly. Like if in the first story product, the focus of the world is this. In the second one, it can become this. You know what I mean? Because you'll be able to test those signals. Is there a character that everyone responds to? Maybe there's going to be more of them in the second story product. Does everyone love the stuff that happens on the farm in this IP, but not so much in the school? Well, then they just graduate from school. Now they're in the farm permanently. You know what I mean?
Right.
All of those learnings would be integrated into the second story product in my model. And it's still not being advertised as a transmedia project, in my opinion. But to the engaged fan, it starts to feel like a universe, and that's the goal, right? We want the audience to be the one saying, "This
like
we were, a video."
We were talking about magical moments in transmedia, and I think on the pre-podcast I was talking about how, like, when I found out that there was a Avengers movie coming out in 2012, I didn't believe it. I was like, "There's no way." Marvel's not talking to Universal. Universal won't talk to Disney. There is no way we are getting the same Iron Man with the same Captain America, with the same Thor, with the same Hulk. Well, we didn't really get the same Hulk, but that was a casting change. But there is no way that all these people are going to be referencing their separate movies and coming together for this. There's just no way. And then I saw the trailer and I was like, it's fake. Deep fake AI.
Back when Will Smith was eating. Well, this even before that.
That's way before. This is 2012. This is 2012. This is 2023.
But really, what we're talking about here is this timeline, right? And a lot of organizations and studios want to rush forward with the timeline. A lot of artists, we just said, want to rush forward in their timeline.
Right.
I want to do the projects. I want these big things. And that always, you gotta let it. Yeah, you gotta let it. You gotta. The fermentation process takes some time.
It's a secret.
It's a secret. Right. I love this idea of not saying it is a transmedia.
Don't overpromise.
Right.
Because you have that thing where that first phase of Marvel. It took them a long time to plan it. They planned it. They were slow about it. They didn't tell anybody until how many years into their plan? 4 or 5 years, like 6 movies in. That was when they told people, "Yep, this is real." And then you had the next couple, and now this current phase that they're in, they are just like, "Ooh, people are expecting a lot from us, aren't they?"
Yeah, they got.
And they are really. It's really struggling to pull it together and keep it cohesive.
Right.
So it's like once you say we're interconnected, people are expecting a whole lot of interconnectedness.
Sure.
So you better know it.
It's true. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm proposing to do different here is knowing that that's the goal and that's where we're going to, and so you're designing a world that is big enough to facilitate that. And Frank, you said that a lot of people just want to rush forward and artists want to rush forward, but my experience in bigger businesses is they've got a 5-year plan. They know that in 3 years from now they're gonna start making another game because they have the facilities, they have the infrastructure, they need to be on track to be making something. And so what this is really doing is just adding another low cost stream that will superpower. That will give them some optionality and some a bit more security, I guess you could say, when they do have to turn on that other production line and start making a game.
Sure.
They can take this farm IP and start running with it.
Right. Rather than to that point though of we want to start production at this time. And that might be one of the issues of that stopgap of it has to happen now. And once again, going all the way back up to this top concept of, we have 3 IPs that we're working on.
Yeah.
A video game is going to be produced or start production in 27.
Yeah.
And it's like,
one is...
I don't know which one it is.
Yeah.
Right. We're not putting a ton of work into, we're going to start honing it down of which one gives us the best shot to make not only the money back, but to launch an IP. Because, once you get into the Netflix series and the feature films and into that like AAA video game sphere, your like audience is huge, right? It's like the PR behind it, the moment, like everybody has vested, the distributors have invested interest, right? Everybody needs this to work. And so at that point, like you want to be damn sure that this is going to work. And so that's why, I mean, that's the, and once again, this is what studios tend to do is they, like they can have 2 out of the 3 fail, right? And just be like, that's not going to work and write that off. Yep. They just need the one to hit. And so, so I think that the concept of the timeline of being like, you're not on a production timeline. To me, all artists, individual artists, or like you're not on a production timeline. You're on an audience timeline of where are they at with this? Because you can scare people off, right? You can scare people off real fast. Of like, oh, this is way like sensory overload too much. Right. And at the same token, you can make it so that there's not enough, and they lose interest, and then before you know it, you're sitting next to a barren fire. So this is all really, really cool and fascinating stuff.
I think there's another. We're in phase 3 now, right? I'm talking about when we're introducing our second story product for the IP. Couple of other big things here would be to crank the discoverability, right? If there's not already a dedicated community manager, now's the time to have one on.
Absolutely.
In fact, I would call them a community architect, and they need to be doing absolutely everything they can to help, organically, that is not buying media, to help the project find its audience. Also, if we're talking about like a studio, they probably have PR professionals that they're working with. They should also do a push to help this earn ink. And I think this would be the time to start introducing merch, right? People love merch, especially if it's like if it's something that an IP they love and is just emerging, and it could be a bit different. And again, merch can be its own conversation, but I wouldn't say go out and print 1,000 coffee mugs with your logo on it. It should really make sense for the IP, so they could solicit pre-orders at the very least.
Oh, absolutely, and that's a good way of testing this.
And there's a lot of like, what was it with like back in 2020 when the Queen's Gambit came out, Netflix had no branded chesting because they didn't know it was going to hit like it did. And I think, what was it, the sales of chess like
people
went up 400%. They weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for it, and Netflix lost out on all of that potential revenue because they just didn't. And this goes back to testing. Whoever knew that was going to work, they just put it up there.
Right.
Yep. In fact, I should even say that right when you pitch it, there should be a slide for each IP that you're pitching. What are the merch possibilities? And like,
right. Sure, right.
Chessboards would be on that slide. So then in my model, you're getting into the next phase, the phase 4, which is like stepping back after these products have lived, after the IP is out there on at least a couple mediums. You're going to evaluate these audience signals and look for the green light or not to move forward.
Right.
And it's about interpreting those signals. Like, what is the quality of the engagement? Are people not just consuming, but also talking about it, sharing, theorizing? Is there fan art, memes, fanfic, role play? Is there discourse happening? You got to be in those Discord channels where they are too. The community architect needs to be there capturing all that. Audience growth, is it continually growing? Does everyone seem to be losing interest, or has it plateaued? Pardon me. are people cross pollination? Are people following it from one format,
Right.
one platform to another? Do they seem emotionally invested? Are they asking for more? Are they demanding a game? Um, and internally, again, if you're within a studio, you should be exposing everyone at regular intervals to like what's happening in the world. If you have characters, you print that up and you put that in like your common area so people know are seeing these.
Right.
What is the internal buzz? Are devs excited to work on the IP?
Right. Right. Right.
And so basically, at this point, the studio is asking, does this world feel big enough, real enough, loved enough to support a game? And this is also where failure can be honestly assessed. And again, it would be a modest failure, a modest cost of failure, and that's the
Right.
success of the model. Failure
Mhm.
caught
Right,
early
right.
at a low cost is the
That
success of the
right, it
model.
works. I love that.
Yeah.
A model that
Yeah.
puts failure up as a success,
Yeah,
right,
right.
is a
Yeah.
good model.
Right.
Because more than likely, and what you're talking about too with the community manager, and this is something that obviously I've written a ton on. Jeff Gomez's collective journey with
Mhm.
regenerative listening, right? And regenerative listening is not just, oh yeah, we got 18 18 likes, great.
Yeah.
What the hell is that, right? What are the conversations? And
Right.
a part of that is engaging with the audience and having conversations with them, right?
Mhm.
Not just it's a monitoring aspect, yes, but also you got to be down and dirty in the weeds with them. He
100%.
told us a great story about when he was continually trying to bring Ultraman back to the States,
Yeah.
and how the conversations he had with some of these people that just could not wait to talk to somebody about Ultraman. They didn't even really know who he was, why they were talking. Right? He's like, no, they got to bring this, and they got to do this, and they got to do that. And he's an Ultraman fan, right? They grew up with him, and so him having that experience once again influences then what the next steps are, right? And then, as we've been saying this entire time, what that video game is focused on.
Right.
What are those? What part of the world are we exploring
Yeah.
further?
What
and
aspects of that world are interesting? Like, what are the things that the characters do that it's like, if it's just like if you want to get that first it's just like when we were playing what was it Valhalla, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and it was like basically an Assassin's Creed game. Like it was Vikings masking as Assassin's Creed, and then it's like all of a sudden, I'm a Viking, I have an axe, and I'm swinging at a farmer, and it's like your ancestors didn't kill people. It's like I'm a Viking, of course they did. The mission title is literally raid this town,
Right,
and I'm not killing people. I can only kill someone with a sword. It's like what is this moral Viking I am? I'm just not
Ludonarrative dissonance, they call that.
Right, and it's like
Right.
like what if you're gonna make a Viking game? What is something someone wants to do? It's like if you're gonna make a Western, there better be guns in there. It's like this is the only part of what I mean.
What is the Skull and Bones had that problem too?
Oh, yeah.
What was supposed to be a quadruple A game that just was not. It's like you can't do it. You can't participate in any of the battles, and then it's just like a sailing,
Right.
walking. It's like you're not.
Right.
That's not what a pirate does. I want to be a pirate. I don't want to be like a monitoring, whatever
Well.
gold intake and like that's not what this is.
Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, go ahead.
It's one of the things that was said about Unknown 9 too. Is like, should this really have been a brawler? It's a game. It's an
Right.
IP that's built on the paranormal and the edges of science and the powers of the mind, and it's a fighting
Yeah.
game. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Maybe not.
and if like what I'm getting into now is like phase 5, which is about bridging, using the story world to bridge between the green light of the game and the launch of the game. And with Unknown 9, that was pretty much our whole phase, right? Like we always knew there was going to be a game. We're always bridging to that. And maybe it would have gone differently if we had had these first 4 steps. But it's a very important phase, right? Because I think that it's it's the phase where you build the transmedia bridge between the second story product and the launch of the game. It's about helping the story world stay alive and evolve and support the trajectory by crafting, a responsive transmedia strategy that's grounded in the current audience, um, narrative, and the development context, right? So
Yeah.
you want to make sure that the narrative um, interfaces properly with the game, right? So depending on the context, that might mean that like the game needs to be like a prequel to everything that's happening in the story world now. That's a very
Sure.
safe way to do it, right? Because you don't have to. Nothing happening in the story world has to touch the game, but it might feel a bit separate, maybe.
Sure.
Or is are you going to lead up to like the events of the game in that bridge?
Mm-hmm.
Get people excited about it. That's another possibility. These are all just like creative choices that you could make.
Right.
And there's this great opportunity to like, I mean, it's an opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge of syncing the story world output with game development without having bottlenecks. There's so much communication that needs to happen, because so often
Right.
on games it's like, you'll give a designer, like a say uh, like an environment artist, you'll give them a brief, and you try to be as specific as possible, as detailed as possible, um, but maybe they'll paint some stuff that like, oh, actually it doesn't fit with the IP because we know that actually, all the beds in this world are actually blue,
Right.
or
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's a
something
slow
less
process,
esoteric.
right? Yeah. Right.
You gotta always be in communication.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, and we're coming up on time here.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting about about that too, right? Of keeping the world alive, right? Of
Hmm.
when there is a bottleneck and inevitably the video game gets delayed. I don't know of a video game that's ever been released on time. Not most of them. Most of them aren't GTA 6,
Yeah, right.
where
No.
it's like 3-4 year
Sure, yeah.
extensions, deadline extensions. But for the most part, no game comes out, and now no game comes out like polished anyways. And everybody's trying to like, oh, it'll be an update. Don't worry. Oh, we need you guys to test anyways.
Yeah, right.
But to keep the world alive, right? So like, even though you're talking about these bridge projects and stuff, it's not as though that's it. It just stops, right?
Yeah.
It can't stop and then wait 3 years and then a video game comes
Yeah,
out. Then
right.
it's nothing, right? It's that these projects are ongoing, and like you said, they're individual, right? And like we've said, they live on their own, right?
Mhm.
They are there to be explored on their own. That then you could go to a second version, and then you could go to the video game from there if you wanted to. You're not forced to. You're encouraged to, but you don't have to.
Right.
And
That's
so
it.
it's the perpetuality of Story World, of Transmedia, and yeah.
And not every and for instance, not everything has to be a calamity. Not every story has to be this world-shaking event,
yeah.
which is kind of
what's happening in Marvel.
with what happened in Marvel. It's like some people like the small stories. There's some people that want to know like specifically what is going on this planet or in this neighborhood at this time. That would be an interest. There's a lot of interesting concepts that can happen on the local level while you're building to these more calamic things. Calamic?
Right.
Is that even a word?
Calamic?
Yeah.
Well, you just made it work.
Calamic. We coined it just now. And that's one of the great things about working like in that context, is like, if you project that in 3 years from now there's going to be a game, that, well, okay, well, maybe I can commission a novel series now. Maybe I can commission something that will take 3 years to produce in the background, or can ferment for that long before we release it. That can be really enabling too.
Right. It's the endless possibilities of transmedia.
And yeah, exactly. Getting back to transmedia, you can have this thing of like, if there's like a window into the game development, the community loves that stuff. They talk about it all. I'm part of a few game communities where it's like every time there's a dev diary, we're in there talking about it.
Sure.
And can you actually give them some agency? Like, do they get
Yeah.
final design, final say on the design of a character that they love? You know, like, oh, here's three
Sure.
options that we're thinking of for Jack's hat.
Vote now,
Which
right.
hat should we go? And of course, they're going to choose the
color
black
feather?
one with the feather.
Yeah, right.
So-
Yeah. I don't.
Naturally, yeah. I
There-
mean,
There's not a lot. This is there's not a lot of. Well, it fits my head pretty well too.
yeah.
Mm.
Well, this has been a great conversation. We covered a lot
Yeah.
of ground here, and we appreciate you jumping on and talking about this. We didn't get to everything that we could have possibly have talked about. I mean, there was I have written in the notes about the podcast for Unknown Nine and how much traction that was picking up, and then how that did not. And so, unfortunately, we didn't get to there, but that's okay. We can always
Unknown
have Chris
9
back on.
out of sight. Unknown 9 out of sight. If you consume one Unknown 9 product, make it that one.
There you go.
It's fantastic. Characters are great. So
Yeah.
and I mean, yeah. Anyway, you're right. We could go on about that. Oh well, stay tuned for part 2 of.
Stay
right.
tuned for part
Yeah.
2.
For what it's worth.
Something tells me this isn't the end of Chris Mason on the
right.
podcast.
Yeah, right.
As you know, we do like our recurring guests.
Yeah.
So
actually have
appreciate you. Right.
We have a recurring guest.
It's coming up next week, or not next week. I'm not giving out dates when these things come out anymore.
Bring me on with Nick Jones, and you'll finally have Chris Jones.
There you
There we
go.
go. That's right. There
Who
we go.
is Chris Jones? Tell me.
It's
That's
just
the
going to
title
be
of the episode.
a really bad morphing of your faces.
And then we have
Bad?
we'll just
Excellent
match
work.
the album art. We'll match the Who is Mike Jones album art.
Oh,
with
yeah,
you
yeah,
guys
right, yeah.
standing there. It's very maroon, if I recall correctly. Any final thoughts or like a salient point or something like that you want to end off on?
No, I'm dying to get into a position where I can try this model. There's a few different sources I'm in Canada, and in the Canadian media system, there's a few different sources of funding, and that's what I'm looking for right now. Is that
All
funding,
right, great.
someone who has that funding, and I'll develop some great IP with them.
Right. Well, if you need our
It's been so much fun talking to you guys. You're my people. You are my people.
Yeah, we're
for
your
sure.
people. So if you need help with any of that, if you manage to wrangle a fish,
Yeah, right.
trust me, we have no shortage of ideas, and we're not very protective of them
Excellent.
because we always come up with new stuff. So
All right.
thanks so much for jumping on. I hope people who listen to this got some good information. Transmedia is not dead. When Transmedia fails, it must rise again like a phoenix, and there's always a reason why it didn't work
right.
perfectly.
Yes. Try on a new platform.
Thanks for exploring with us, intrepid adventurers. If you want more content like this, we have quite a few episodes, don't we, Frank?
We have experts on quite a lot. Some people that are pretty heavy hitters in the transmedia community. You should listen to Jeff Gomez and Houston Howard and Nick Jones. They are all fantastic episodes. If you want to learn about creating your own story world, your own transmedia franchise, that's a place to start. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time.